A young police officer boldly arrested Lieutenant Sarah Thompson after accusing her of shoplifting from a convenience store. The situation escalated when he insulted and handcuffed her in front of the public. But it wasn't until Sarah was brought back to the station that the officer realized he had just arrested and humiliated one of the most respected and high-ranking officers in the force. What will happen next when the truth comes to light? Before following this gripping story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the upcoming thrilling and surprising videos. It was a warm Wednesday afternoon, the sun shining brightly in the clear blue sky, as Lieutenant Sarah Thompson stepped out of her unmarked police vehicle. She had just finished an important meeting at the city police headquarters and was on her way back to the station. Sarah Thompson, a black woman in her late 30s, was one of the highest-ranking officers in her district. Through years of hard work and dedication, she had earned the respect of everyone, from her colleagues to the community she served. Sarah had a confident and commanding presence. Her average height, combined with a fit physique and a meticulously kept police uniform, gave anyone who encountered her a strong sense of professionalism and seriousness. Her sharp eyes could analyze situations instantly, and her leadership skills were undeniable. Whenever Sarah walked into a room, all eyes turned to her, not because she was a black woman in a position of power, but because she had proven herself worthy of respect through her outstanding achievements. That day, Sarah decided to stop by a small convenience store on the corner of an old neighborhood to grab a snack before heading back to the station. This store, though small and unremarkable, had become a favorite stop of hers whenever she had the chance. She was familiar with the clerk there, an older Indian man named Mr. Singh. Usually they would chat briefly about the state of the neighborhood, the issues the community was facing, and occasionally share some light-hearted jokes about work. As Sarah walked into the store, she felt a slight tension in the air, something she wasn't used to feeling at this familiar spot. She thought it might just be the exhaustion from a long day, or perhaps the hot afternoon weather. Sarah approached the counter and was greeted with a familiar nod and smile from Mr. Singh. "Hello, Lieutenant Thompson. Good to see you again," he greeted her warmly. Sarah returned his smile lightly. "Hello, Mr. Singh. I'm just stopping by to grab something and then I'll be on my way." She quickly picked up a bottle of water and a granola bar before heading to the checkout. However, as she walked past the shelves, Sarah suddenly felt eyes watching her. When she turned around, she saw a white police officer standing in the far corner of the store. He looked younger than her, probably in his early 30s, with a stiff demeanor, and his cold blue eyes were locked onto her every movement. Sarah frowned slightly when she saw him, but she tried to brush off her discomfort. She didn't know who this officer was, which struck her as odd since she was familiar with most of the officers in the area. Nonetheless, she reassured herself that there was no reason to be concerned. After all, she was a lieutenant, a commanding officer in the police force, and there was no reason for her to feel uneasy. Still, the officer's presence made it hard for her to feel completely at ease. Just as she reached the door of the store and was about to leave, a cold voice called out from behind her. "Excuse me, miss, I need to see your ID," the voice demanded, stopping her in her tracks. Sarah frowned again and turned around to face the white officer she had noticed earlier. He stepped toward her, his hand resting on his holster in a menacing gesture. His face was stiff, and his cold eyes didn't leave Sarah. His name badge clearly read, Jake Miller. The initial worry she had felt was now turning into irritation. Sarah kept her composure, but her gaze sharpened. This wasn't the first time she had faced such situations, those suspicious looks, those veiled words, all because of her skin color. But she was a professional, and she knew how to handle these kinds of encounters. "Excuse me, but I don't understand why you're asking for my ID," Sarah responded, her voice calm but firm. She kept her tone from becoming harsh, but her resolve was clear. Officer Miller stopped, keeping just a few feet between them, but his posture screamed confidence mixed with arrogance. He eyed her from head to toe with suspicion. "I saw you acting suspiciously in the store. I need to check your ID immediately." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Suspicious behavior? She had simply bought a bottle of water and a granola bar. Nothing she had done could be considered suspicious. She tried to stay calm, but anger started to rise within her. "What are you implying?" Sarah asked, her voice still composed, but her eyes challenging. "I'm Lieutenant Sarah Thompson, City Police Department, and if you want to check my ID, you'll need to have a legitimate reason." Miller narrowed his eyes, clearly not liking being challenged. "Lieutenant, huh?" He smirked, his face showing disbelief. "I saw you handling merchandise and acting like you were trying to steal something. I've asked for your ID and you're going to show it to me right now." Sarah felt the anger boiling inside her, but she kept herself under control. She understood the situation she was in. This wasn't just a normal confrontation, it was steeped in racism, something she had faced more times than she could count in her career. Sarah took a deep breath, trying not to let her anger take over. "You're accusing me of stealing?" Sarah asked, her voice now sharper. "I only bought a bottle of water and a granola bar. I paid for everything. If you think something's wrong, you'll need to provide more solid evidence." Miller didn't budge. His eyes grew even colder and more aggressive. "I've seen enough. This is your last chance to show me your ID before I place you under arrest." Sarah felt her blood boiling. Miller's accusations were ridiculous and deeply insulting, but she knew that reacting too strongly could make things worse. She was a police officer. She knew that in just one wrong move, the situation could escalate from words to violence in an instant. She stepped forward, directly facing Miller, her gaze never leaving his. "I am Lieutenant Sarah Thompson, City Police Department, and I will not show you my ID unless you have a legal and legitimate reason to request it." Miller stared at her for a long moment, his face full of displeasure and anger. No one challenged him like that, especially not a black woman, and certainly not someone whose reputation he didn't know. His hand tightened on his gun as if preparing to deal with a real criminal. "Lieutenant, huh? Fine," Miller said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "We'll see who you are once you're in handcuffs." Before Sarah could say another word, Miller pulled out his handcuffs and took a step forward, commanding in a cold and authoritarian voice, "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for suspicion of shoplifting." Sarah stood frozen for a moment, feeling as though time had stopped. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just an insult, it was a blatant abuse of power. To be accused of shoplifting, something she had never imagined would happen, was now becoming a reality right in front of her, and all because she was a black woman. However, she didn't have much time to process it further. With Miller's angry, arrogant eyes watching her, Sarah knew that the situation could turn dangerous at any moment. Despite the rage boiling inside her, she understood that she needed to act smart. This wasn't just about herself, it was about keeping the situation from becoming violent. Feeling the curious stares of the other customers around her and the suffocating silence in the store, Sarah took a deep breath and slowly turned around, putting her hands behind her head, as Miller had instructed. She wasn't going to give him any more excuses to escalate the situation. The cold sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around her wrists made Sarah realize that things had truly spiraled out of her control. Sarah stood motionless, feeling the cold steel of the handcuffs tighten around her wrists. She had used these cuffs hundreds of times in her career, but never thought she would one day be the one wearing them. A wave of humiliation washed over her, not just from Officer Miller's actions, but from the sheer absurdity and injustice of it all. She could hear the murmurs of the people around her in the store, their eyes fixed on her, as if they were witnessing an unbelievable scene. Miller grabbed Sarah's arm firmly and pushed her toward the front door of the store. Although the handcuffs bit into her wrists, the physical pain couldn't compare to the humiliation she was enduring. She, a lieutenant who had dedicated years to protecting this community, was now being treated like a petty criminal in front of everyone. The air in the store grew thick, and Sarah struggled to keep herself composed in the midst of the emotional storm. "You're making a huge mistake, Officer Miller," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady, though she could hear the tremble in her words. "I am not someone you can abuse your power over like this, I told you, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Thompson of the City Police Department. I didn't steal anything." Miller didn't respond, only smirking arrogantly, his eyes filled with smug satisfaction. "You can say whatever you want, but I saw how you acted in the store. Now I'm taking you back to the station, and the law will deal with you." Sarah could hear the glee in Miller's voice. To him, this arrest wasn't just about the law, it was a power game. He didn't care about the truth. He only wanted to relish the feeling of dominance, especially since the person he was facing was a black woman in a uniform he seemingly disrespected. As they exited the store, the eyes of passers-by followed her. Sarah tried to hold her head high, though inside she felt like she was being crushed. She didn't want anyone, especially Miller, to see her falter under the weight of this situation. Despite the humiliation, she was determined to maintain her dignity. Once outside, the harsh sunlight beat down on Sarah, adding to the overwhelming pressure of the moment. Pedestrians stopped and stared as they saw a police officer in handcuffs being led away like a criminal. Some people took out their phones to film the scene, and Sarah could hear the murmuring and questions rising from the crowd. It wasn't every day they saw a cop being arrested, especially not someone as high-ranking as Sarah. Miller shoved Sarah toward the patrol car parked on the curb. The back door was yanked open, and without a word he forced her to sit inside, then slammed the door shut. Sarah was now locked in the back seat of a police car, a position she had never imagined herself being in. Inside the car, the air was stifling, with the sunlight pouring in through the windows, making the space feel even more oppressive. Sitting in the car, Sarah could see Miller standing outside, radio in hand, calling in to headquarters. She heard every word that came out of his mouth over the radio waves. "This is Officer Jake Miller, badge number 4396, Miller said with an arrogant tone. "I've just arrested a suspect. Female, black, mid-30s, name is Lieutenant Sarah Thompson of the City Police Department. Reason, suspected shoplifting." Sarah felt like her world was crumbling beneath her feet. Her entire career, the reputation she had built over the years, was now being reduced to a few words broadcast over the radio. She couldn't believe things had escalated to this point. This wasn't just a personal insult, it was an attack on her entire career. In the police force, reputation was everything. Once it was tarnished, it was nearly impossible to regain the trust of colleagues and the community. When Miller climbed into the driver's seat and drove away from the store, Sarah stared out the window as the familiar streets passed by. These were streets she had patrolled, protected, and served for many years. Every street corner and intersection held memories of her work, late-night patrols, resolving conflicts, keeping the peace. But now, she was the one sitting in the back seat, being treated like a criminal. The patrol car slowly pulled into the parking lot of the police station, and Sarah felt her heart pounding harder with each passing second. She had walked into this building hundreds of times, but never under circumstances like this. Not only was she under arrest, but she was being dragged through the station's entrance like a convicted criminal in full view of her colleagues. Colleagues she had worked with, led, and supported, now looked at her with confusion, suspicion, and even shock. Miller stopped the car, opened the door, and yanked Sarah out with enough force to make her lose her balance for a moment. Sarah stood up, trying to regain her composure and stability. She said nothing, but her eyes burned with defiance and determination. She knew she had to fight not only for her innocence, but also for the honor and career she had worked so hard to build. As they walked into the station, the atmosphere inside seemed to slow down. Every officer and staff member stopped what they were doing and turned their eyes towards Sarah with disbelief. Some whispered to each other, while others looked at her with sympathy. But Sarah knew that, in the eyes of many, the image of her in handcuffs had created a stain that would be hard to wash away. "Lieutenant Thompson, what's going on here?" one officer murmured, his eyes full of confusion. Miller ignored all questions and pushed her toward Officer Reynolds's desk, the officer in charge of processing suspects. Slamming a stack of papers down on the desk with a cold attitude, Miller addressed Reynolds directly. "I've got a suspect to process, suspected shoplifting." Reynolds looked up and his eyes widened when he recognized Sarah. "Lieutenant Thompson?" Reynolds asked in surprise, his voice full of confusion and disbelief. "What's going on? You were arrested for shoplifting." Sarah looked at Reynolds, feeling like no amount of explanation would change anything at that moment. The truth was obvious, but in the eyes of her colleagues, what they were seeing in front of them held more weight. In that moment, her honor seemed to be spiraling into a whirlwind of doubt and judgment. All she could hope for was that the truth would soon come to light. Sarah tried to keep her mind steady as she stepped through the doors of the police station, the place where she had dedicated so many years of her life. Everything felt as familiar as it always had, from the desks and fluorescent lights to the faces of her colleagues. But today, that familiarity felt distant, even frightening, because she was walking in not as a powerful lieutenant, but as a handcuffed suspect, mocked and doubted. The air in the station suddenly grew heavy as everyone in the room stopped and focused their eyes on Sarah. Their gazes were filled with confusion, surprise, and sometimes judgment. Some officers couldn't believe what they were seeing, a seasoned lieutenant like Sarah being handcuffed and escorted by a young officer like Miller. Miller pushed Sarah straight through the main lobby, not caring about the stares from those around them. The arrogance on his face was unmistakable. He was clearly enjoying the moment. Arresting a superior officer, especially a powerful black woman like Sarah, wasn't just about doing his job. It was his way of asserting dominance and feeding his ego. Reynolds, the officer in charge at the desk, was still reeling from the shock of seeing Sarah. He had worked with her for years and knew her dedication and integrity. The idea of shoplifting seemed impossible when associated with Sarah Thompson, but work was work, and he had no choice but to follow the procedure. "Is this for real, Lieutenant?" Reynolds asked in a low, worried tone. He knew Sarah wasn't someone to be cornered like this without a solid reason. "Can you explain to me what's going on?" Sarah met Reynolds' gaze, trying to keep her voice calm. "I didn't steal anything, Reynolds. This is a blatant abuse of power by Officer Miller. I've been set up." Reynolds turned to look at Miller, who was now standing behind them with his arms crossed, a smug smile on his face. "She was arrested as she was about to leave the convenience store. I saw her suspicious behavior with the merchandise myself," Miller said without hesitation. His voice was cold, carrying clear disdain for Sarah. Reynolds shook his head, still in disbelief. He had known Sarah long enough to understand that these accusations couldn't be true, but he couldn't do much more than follow the procedure at this point. Reynolds sighed, the weariness showing on his face as he grabbed the paperwork Miller had thrown on the desk, and began the process. "All right, we'll have to go through the procedure," Reynolds said reluctantly. "I'll need to fingerprint you and take your picture, Lieutenant. I really don't want to do this, but we need to follow the rules." Sarah nodded, saying nothing more. She understood this wasn't Reynolds' fault, and the only thing he could do was perform his duties. However, the shame she felt at that moment was overwhelming. Being treated like a criminal in the police station, where she had worked for years, weighed heavily on her heart. Reynolds pulled out the fingerprinting kit, his eyes still gleaming with unease. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment as her fingers touched the cold black ink. Each finger was pressed firmly onto the white paper, one fingerprint after another, forming a sequence of marks that she had once used to identify real criminals. But now she was the one facing the indignity of this process. Miller stood there, arms still crossed, his face full of satisfaction. Every step in this procedure was a testament to the power he was trying to display in front of Sarah and everyone around them. But Sarah, though hurt and angry, knew she couldn't let Miller see her break. This was not just a personal confrontation, but a fight to protect her dignity. After the fingerprinting was done, Reynolds pointed toward the white wall where the camera was set up. "We need to take your picture, Lieutenant." Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward. She stood tall in front of the camera, eyes straight ahead, trying to maintain some sense of dignity in this awful situation. The flash went off in an instant, capturing an image Sarah knew would haunt her forever. This wasn't just a picture of humiliation, it was evidence of the injustice she was facing. When the flash went out, Sarah turned back to face Miller. He stood there, his lips curled in a mocking smile. "Do you think you'll get out of this easily, Lieutenant?" Miller asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You made a big mistake thinking you could stand above the law." Sarah looked straight into Miller's eyes, the anger burning inside her, but she kept her voice calm. "This isn't about the law. This is about you abusing your power, and I won't let you win in this dirty game." Miller only smirked, saying nothing more. He relished Sarah's struggle but clearly believed he was in control. Once all the paperwork was done, Reynolds placed the handcuffs back on Sarah's wrists and led her toward the holding cells. She walked down the hallway of the police station, where she had once walked as a leader, as someone who enforced the law. But now each step felt like a dagger to her pride. When they reached the holding cell area, Sarah saw the cold steel door open in front of her. It was where she would be locked up, not as a protector of the law but as a suspect. Reynolds looked at her with sympathy before closing the door behind her. The sound of the lock clicking shut was cold and final, a sound that Sarah would never forget. Sitting down on the hard bench in the small cell, Sarah let her body relax, feeling as if all the strength had been drained from her. She knew this was just the beginning of a long fight. But Sarah also knew she wouldn't let herself be defeated by this injustice. She had to find a way to fight back and prove her innocence. Sarah sat alone in the cold, dimly lit cell, feeling the weight of isolation pressing down on her mind. Everything had happened so quickly, so absurdly, that she still couldn't fully believe it was real. How could she, a lieutenant with years of experience, end up being arrested on such ridiculous charges? She knew this wasn't just a simple mistake, but a result of racism and abuse of power from people like Officer Miller. But even in this situation, Sarah couldn't give up. She knew the truth would come out in the end. The sound of the cell door opening snapped Sarah out of her thoughts. She looked up to see a woman enter the room. Captain Rebecca Davis, Sarah's direct superior and one of the people she respected most in the force. Davis was a strong, stern and fair woman, known for her zero tolerance toward wrongdoing. As she walked into the cell, her face was set in a firm expression, but her eyes showed concern. "What is going on here, Thompson?" Captain Davis asked, her voice firm but tinged with disbelief. "I heard you were arrested for shoplifting." She said the words with a hint of doubt, clearly finding them hard to believe. Sarah stood up, facing her superior. Relief flooded her when she saw Davis there. If anyone could help her through this situation, it was Rebecca Davis. But still, this was an incredibly humiliating moment, and Sarah had to fight to keep her composure as she explained. "It's a setup, Captain," Sarah said, her voice calm but filled with determination. "Officer Miller abused his power and arrested me on completely baseless accusations. He claims I stole something from a convenience store, even though I only bought a bottle of water and a granola bar. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's racism and abuse of authority." Davis didn't respond immediately. She studied Sarah for a long moment, as if trying to assess the situation. Davis was a fair and tough leader, but also someone who was willing to listen. Her eyes remained sharp, and Sarah knew that Davis was weighing every aspect of the story. After a moment of silence, Davis turned to Officer Reynolds, who had led her to the cell. "Release her immediately," Davis ordered, her voice filled with authority. Reynolds looked awkwardly down at the stack of papers in his hand, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. "Captain, I understand the situation, but procedure is procedure. I have to process her according to the rules." Davis didn't seem surprised or fazed. She knew how the system worked and the rigidity of the process, but she also knew that not everything could be handled by strict rules, especially when justice was being abused. "I don't care about the procedure right now," Davis said, her eyes flashing with firm resolve. "Release her now. If there's any issue, I'll take full responsibility." Reynolds had no choice but to comply with the order. He quickly unlocked the cell door and removed the handcuffs from Sarah's wrists. As the sense of freedom returned to her hands, Sarah let out a quiet sigh of relief. But she knew this was only the first step in a long fight to reclaim her justice. Davis shot a sharp glance at Sarah. "Come with me," she said without waiting for a response, then turned and walked out of the cell. Sarah followed behind, trying to keep calm but with a whirlwind of emotions still churning inside her. As they walked out of the holding area, all eyes in the station remained fixed on Sarah. The oppressive silence hung thick in the air. Her colleagues, the people she had led and worked alongside, now stood watching her with a mix of surprise and confusion. Sarah didn't let it bother her. She walked with the confidence she had built over years of policing. She knew that explanations or even the truth wouldn't be enough to erase those doubtful looks immediately, but she was determined to regain her honor. They entered Captain Davis's office, a small but organized room where Sarah had had many important meetings before. Davis sat behind her desk and motioned for Sarah to sit across from her. "Sarah, I've worked with you for years and know that you're one of my best officers," Davis began, her tone softer but still serious. "I believe there's something very wrong with this case. Officer Miller has shown signs of power abuse before, and this isn't the first time I've heard about issues involving him, but we'll need solid evidence if we're going to resolve this completely." Sarah nodded, knowing Davis was right. What had happened wasn't just a simple power play. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy her reputation. "I know, Captain. I believe the security footage from the store will prove my innocence. If we can get the original footage, I'm sure it will clear my name." Davis thought for a moment, then said, "I'll personally request the footage from the store and launch an investigation into this case. But you need to be prepared, Sarah. Miller isn't the kind of person to back down easily. If he's really trying to sabotage you, then everything may have been set up very carefully." Sarah sighed, knowing this better than anyone. She had seen cases where people in power would do anything to cover up their wrongdoings. "I'm not going to let him get away with this, Captain," she said, her voice firm. "I've dedicated my life to upholding the law and justice, and I will fight to clear my name." Captain Davis looked at Sarah with empathy, but also with seriousness. "I believe in you, Sarah, but we have to be careful. This isn't just about your honor. It's about fairness within the entire system we serve." Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her, knowing that she wasn't alone in this fight. Davis was here, standing by her side, and together they would uncover the truth. But at the same time, Sarah knew that the battle was far from over. Miller was dangerous, and he wouldn't easily accept defeat. Sarah felt her resolve harden. She wasn't just fighting for herself, but for everyone who had ever suffered injustice in this system. She wouldn't stop until she had reclaimed everything that had been taken from her. Sarah left Captain Davis's office with a renewed sense of determination, but she knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. This wasn't just a personal case. It had turned into a battle to reclaim justice for herself and her reputation. Although Captain Davis was now on her side, Sarah understood that without concrete evidence, it would be difficult to bring the truth to light. As she stepped out of the office, Sarah immediately called Jason Walker, her trusted partner. Jason was a longtime friend and colleague, someone with a sharp mind and unwavering loyalty to the truth, no matter who they were up against. "Sarah, what's going on?" Jason's voice came through the phone, full of concern. "Jason, I need your help. I've been set up and arrested for a theft I didn't commit. Officer Miller is behind it all. He accused me of stealing from a convenience store, but I believe the security footage will prove my innocence," Sarah explained, her voice calm but filled with determination. Jason paused for a moment, clearly shocked by what Sarah had just said. "Are you serious? This is unbelievable. How could this happen to you? Miller, that guy's always had a reputation for abusing his authority, but I never thought he'd pull something like this on a lieutenant." "That's right, Jason. He's gone too far this time, and I can't let him get away with it. But to do that, I need solid proof. We have to find the original footage from the convenience store." Jason sighed, realizing the gravity of the situation. "All right, I'll look into who reported the theft and find a way to get that original footage. If Miller's done anything to tamper with or cover up the evidence, we'll find out." "Thank you, Jason. I don't know what I'd do without you," Sarah said, feeling relieved to know she had at least one loyal friend standing by her in this fight. "Don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of this. I'll be in touch as soon as I have any information," Jason replied confidently. Sarah hung up the phone, trying to stay calm as she thought about the next steps. She knew full well that Miller hadn't done this randomly. He had planned everything carefully, and he was trying to push her into a corner where her career and reputation would be ruined. She needed to find every piece of evidence before Miller could destroy it. One thought suddenly crossed Sarah's mind. The convenience store had security cameras, and if Miller had tampered with the footage, that meant someone had either helped him or at least knew about his actions. Sarah remembered the store clerk's behavior that day. He had seemed nervous when Miller showed up and made the accusation. She wasn't sure whether he had been coerced or willingly helped Miller, but he definitely knew more than he had let on. Immediately, Sarah decided that talking to the store clerk was her top priority. She needed to find out if he was involved in this conspiracy, and if he was, she needed him to tell the truth. The next morning, Sarah and Jason went to the convenience store, the place where it had all happened. The store looked just as it always had, but to Sarah it no longer felt like the familiar spot she used to visit. Memories of humiliation and insult flooded back, making her feel a suffocating sense of unease as she walked in. The store clerk, Mr. Patel, stood behind the counter as usual. When he saw Sarah and Jason, his face immediately tensed up. "Hello, Mr. Patel," Sarah said, keeping her tone calm. "I need to talk to you about what happened the other day." Patel swallowed nervously, clearly worried. I already told the police everything. I don't know anything more. I was just doing what I was told." Sarah stepped closer, her sharp eyes locking onto Patel's, unwavering. "I don't think so, Mr. Patel. I know something is wrong with this case, and I believe you know more than you've said. This is your chance to tell the truth before things get worse." Patel shook his head, beads of sweat starting to form on his forehead. I didn't have a choice. Officer Miller came here a few days ago. He told me to report a theft. I didn't want to get involved, but he threatened me. I didn't have any other option." Sarah felt a surge of anger but kept her composure. She now realized that Miller's actions had gone further than she had imagined. He hadn't just staged an arrest, he had coerced others into playing along with his power game. "Mr. Patel, we need your cooperation," Jason said, his voice sharp. "We're going to need an official statement from you about Miller forcing you to make a false report. If you do the right thing, we can help you." Patel nodded, clearly broken and afraid. "I'll do whatever you ask. I just don't want to get into any more trouble." After securing Patel's cooperation, Sarah and Jason left the store. Sarah felt a bit of relief knowing that they now had a crucial witness, but she knew this was only the beginning. They still needed the security footage and more evidence to bring this case to a close. Jason promised to keep digging deeper into the case and find out more about the footage. Back at the police station, Sarah received a message from Captain Davis. "The security footage has been retrieved. Meet me at the station immediately." Sarah's heart raced. This could be the key to revealing the truth, but there was still a nagging feeling of unease. She knew that Miller wouldn't let everything slip through his fingers so easily. He was smart and would do anything to protect his secrets. Sarah and Jason rushed back to the station, preparing for the next steps. The tension in the air increased as they headed toward Captain Davis's office. A mix of hope and anxiety welled up inside Sarah. Would the footage be enough to prove her innocence? Could they finally bring down Miller and end this humiliating ordeal? The fight wasn't over yet, but Sarah was ready for whatever came next. Sarah and Jason quickly entered the police station, a sense of tension blanketing the atmosphere around them. Everything seemed unusually quiet, as if everyone was waiting for something important to happen. Sarah could feel the pressure in each step, knowing that everything now hinged on the security footage Captain Davis had secured. The door to Davis's office was slightly ajar, and inside Captain Davis sat waiting, her face betraying little emotion, but her eyes were sharp and serious. On her desk was a laptop, and Sarah knew the security footage was there. "Take a seat, Sarah," Captain Davis said. motioning for her and Jason to sit across from her. Jason kept his professional demeanor, but Sarah felt her breath shorten as her eyes fell on the laptop. Davis took a deep breath, her gaze softening slightly as she looked at Sarah. "I've reviewed the footage," she said, her voice low and heavy, "but there's a serious problem. The most important part of the footage has been tampered with." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "Tampered with? How is that possible? The footage is the only thing that can prove my innocence." Davis nodded, her eyes also showing frustration. "I know, and that's why we have to act immediately. I believe Miller had a hand in this. The footage shows you in the store, but the crucial part, the part where you're accused of stealing, has been cut out. We need to find the original footage before he destroys everything." Jason, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up, his voice tense. "That means Miller still has the unedited footage. If we don't act now, he'll have time to erase all evidence." Sarah felt her anger rise. Miller was trying to ruin her career and her honor, and now he had almost succeeded. "We need to find the evidence before it's too late," she said, her voice filled with determination. "He can't get away with this." Davis nodded. "I've called for an official investigation into Miller's actions, but we need to move fast. Jason, Sarah, you'll need to find out where he's hiding the original footage. If we can recover it, this whole thing will be over." Just as they were about to plan their next move, the office door swung open, and Miller stormed in, his face tense, his eyes full of anger and resentment. He marched straight in, ignoring everyone else in the room. "What the hell is going on here?" Miller demanded, his voice filled with rage. "Why am I hearing that you're investigating me?" Captain Davis stood up, calmly facing Miller. "We're investigating your actions, Miller. There's evidence that you've been abusing your power and tampering with evidence in the case involving Lieutenant Thompson." Miller scoffed, his smug expression unchanged. "Is this a joke? Thompson was caught red-handed stealing, and now you're turning around to investigate me. What do you think you're doing?" Sarah stood up, looking Miller straight in the eye, no longer afraid. "You orchestrated this whole thing. You forced Mr. Patel to make a false report and tampered with the security footage to hide the truth. I know you're trying to destroy me, but you won't get away with it." Miller stepped forward, his face full of defiance. "You think you can beat me? You have no evidence. It's over, Thompson. You're just clinging to a career that's already done." Jason couldn't hold back anymore, standing up to face Miller. "We'll find the evidence, Miller. The footage you tampered with won't stay hidden forever. If you think you can get away with this, you're wrong." Miller narrowed his eyes, his face darkening. "Don't think you can go up against me. I've been here long enough to know how to cover everything up." Davis, maintaining her calm and authoritative tone, interrupted. "Miller, I've already initiated a full investigation into your actions. If you have anything to say, prepare to face the truth. I won't allow anyone, including you, to corrupt this system." Miller let out a huff and took a step back, his face full of anger. "You're all going to regret this," he spat before storming out of the office, slamming the door behind him. The air in the room felt heavy after Miller left. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she knew this wasn't over. Jason looked at her, his eyes full of determination. "We have to find the original footage. If we don't, Miller will turn everything against us." Captain Davis nodded in agreement. "We need to figure out where Miller is hiding that footage. It's probably been moved or hidden somewhere he thinks no one will find it." Sarah thought back to her previous investigations, and an idea flashed in her mind. "If Miller wants to hide the footage, he wouldn't keep it in obvious places, but I bet he's keeping it somewhere he has full control over." Jason furrowed his brow. "He has a house in the suburbs. Maybe he's stashing it there." Davis considered for a moment, then nodded. "Good, we'll investigate his house, but we have to move quickly. If we don't act soon, Miller will destroy the evidence." A plan was made in an instant. Jason and Sarah would break into Miller's house to find the footage, while Captain Davis would work to keep Miller from interfering. The entire team knew this was their last chance to find the truth and expose Miller for who he really was. Sarah and Jason left the police station, preparing for the dangerous mission ahead. Both knew that this was their only shot, and failure wasn't an option. As they drove toward Miller's house, Sarah felt the weight of every second. If they didn't find the footage, her honor would be permanently destroyed, and Miller would continue his reign unchecked. As they neared Miller's house, the sense of anticipation and tension grew stronger. Sarah knew she couldn't back down now. She had come too far and endured too much to quit. At all costs, the truth had to come out. "We're doing this," Sarah said firmly as she and Jason prepared to act. "This is the final battle." Sarah and Jason quietly approached Miller's house, which stood isolated in the suburbs. Darkness was beginning to fall, covering their cautious steps. Miller's house, a two-story modern home with a peaceful exterior, showed no signs of hiding a dark conspiracy. But Sarah knew that behind its calm facade, it concealed the cover-up of illegal actions. If they didn't act quickly, Miller could destroy the crucial evidence before they had a chance to prove her innocence. "You ready?" Sarah whispered, her hand gripping the goon at her side. Jason nodded, his eyes sharp and resolute. They had faced many challenges together throughout their careers, and tonight they were about to face one of the most dangerous ones yet. "We go in through the back. I checked earlier. There are no security cameras there," Jason whispered, leading Sarah toward the rear door of the house. They moved carefully, keeping completely silent, ready for anything that might happen. As they reached the door, Jason crouched down and quickly picked the lock with the toolkit he had brought. Sarah stood by, her eyes scanning the surroundings, feeling the tension in the air. Everything in this moment depended on their actions. The door clicked open softly and they both slipped inside the darkened house. Inside Miller's house, everything was eerily quiet. Sarah could feel the suffocating stillness in the air. They made their way toward Miller's private office, the room they believed the unedited footage was hidden in. The office was located on the second floor at the end of the hallway, with a large window overlooking the backyard. Jason signaled for Sarah to wait, while he checked to make sure the coast was clear before they entered. "No one's here," Jason whispered, and they both stepped inside. The room was cluttered with papers and files scattered everywhere, but that only made Sarah feel they were getting closer to the truth. Jason quickly opened drawers and searched the cabinets, while Sarah searched around Miller's desk. Any clue, no matter how small, could be the key to unlocking this case. "Got it," Jason whispered excitedly, holding up a small, unmarked USB drive. Sarah saw it and immediately knew it was what they needed to prove that the footage had been tampered with. But just as they found the footage, a loud noise came from the front of the house, making both of them jump. Sarah's heart raced. It was Miller. He had come home earlier than they had expected. His footsteps were heavy as they echoed through the house, each step full of anger. "Hurry," Sarah whispered urgently, her eyes wide as she realized Miller was heading straight for the office. Jason pocketed the USB, and they both quickly looked for a place to hide. Sarah pressed herself against the corner of the room, her breath shallow, her hand gripping her gun tightly. The door to the office burst open, and Miller stormed in, gun drawn. His face was full of fury as he immediately noticed the disarray in his office. "Come out now, I know you're in here," Miller shouted, his voice filled with anger and madness. Sarah knew this was the moment of truth. She looked at Jason, exchanged a glance and nodded. They both quickly emerged from their hiding spots, guns drawn, aiming at Miller. "Freeze, Miller, drop the gun now," Sarah ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. Miller turned, his eyes flashing with unrestrained rage. "You think you can take me down? You think you'll get away with this, Sarah? No one's going to believe you. I'm going to make you regret ever crossing me." Sarah held her gun steady, her eyes locked on him. "It's over, Miller. I have the unedited footage, and you're going to pay for everything you've done." Miller gritted his teeth, his eyes wild with fury. He suddenly raised his gun, but before he could act, Jason fired a shot, hitting him in the leg. Miller collapsed to the ground, his gun flying out of his hand and skidding across the floor. He groaned in pain, but even then, he didn't stop his defiance. You'll never win. This system will always back me. Sarah stood over him, her gun still aimed at him. The system you thought you could abuse is falling apart, Miller. We'll make sure the truth comes out and no one, not even you, will stop us. Jason pulled out a pair of handcuffs and cuffed Miller. You've lost, Miller. Now you'll have to face real justice. Police arrived on the scene shortly after. Sarah and Jason handed Miller over to the arresting officers, and the USB drive containing the footage was safely in Jason's pocket. They had succeeded in finding the evidence, and now it was time to bring it into the light and restore Sarah's honor. A few days later, the footage was thoroughly analyzed and confirmed to have been tampered with by Miller. Thanks to Sarah's bravery and determination, the truth was finally revealed. Miller was arrested and faced multiple charges for abuse of power and tampering with evidence. After days of relentless fighting, Sarah had finally reclaimed her honor. She emerged from the shadow of injustice, standing tall with pride and resilience. Jason stood beside her, smiling with pride. "We did it," he said. Sarah nodded, her eyes glowing with belief in justice. "Yes, we did, and we'll keep fighting for the truth no matter what." The battle was over, but for Sarah it was just one chapter in her journey of upholding justice. A few weeks after the showdown with Miller, the atmosphere at the police station had returned to normal, but the scars of the recent events still lingered. Sarah sat in her office, her eyes drifting over the plaques and medals hanging on the walls, reflecting on how everything had felt like a long, surreal dream. But it was all real, a battle to reclaim her honor and justice that had pitted her against a broken system. Once the unedited footage had been made public, everything had changed rapidly. Miller was charged with abuse of power, evidence tampering, and faced multiple other charges related to his unlawful actions. A deeper investigation into his past revealed a series of other abuses of power. Colleagues who had covered up for Miller's behavior were also held accountable. For Sarah, the restoration of her honor wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for the entire system she had devoted her career to. She had proven that no one was above the law, and the truth would always find a way to be revealed, no matter how hard people tried to hide it. She had become a symbol of persistence and courage in the pursuit of justice, not only for her colleagues, but also for the community she served. Jason walked into her office, flashing a friendly smile. "I still can't believe it's all over," he said, sitting down in the chair across from her. "We fought all the way to the end, and now everything's out in the open." Sarah smiled, but her eyes still held a firm resolve. "Yes, but this was just one chapter in my life. This fight wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who's ever been wronged by the system. We have to keep making sure that justice and integrity are upheld, Jason. No one should be able to abuse their power and destroy someone else's life." Jason nodded, completely agreeing. "I've got your back, Sarah. You showed all of us that justice can win, even when everything seems to be against us." At that moment, Captain Davis walked in, her eyes full of pride as she looked at Sarah. "Thompson," she said, her voice serious but filled with emotion, "you've done something extraordinary. I'm incredibly proud of how you handled this situation. This police department needs people like you, people who are willing to fight for the truth." Sarah stood up and shook hands with Captain Davis. "Thank you, Captain. I just did what I knew was right, and I believe that, after everything that's happened, we can rebuild trust in the system." Davis nodded. "Absolutely. And you've shown us that no matter how hard it gets, justice can always prevail." As the conversation ended, Sarah stood by the window, looking out over the city she had protected for so many years. The morning light was beginning to shine, casting a glow over the streets and buildings. Sarah felt a sense of renewal after everything that had happened. She had faced the toughest challenge of her career, and now she knew she could handle anything. Outside, some of her colleagues walked by the window, nodding respectfully, a recognition she hadn't always received. Her honor had been restored, and more importantly, her belief in herself had been reinforced. Sarah returned to her desk with a newfound sense of responsibility and determination. She knew the fight for justice and integrity would never end, but she also knew she was ready for whatever came next. Her future held many more challenges, but now she felt stronger than ever. Sarah Thompson was no longer just a lieutenant. She was a symbol of resilience, of belief in justice and truth. And no matter what happened, she would always stand firm against injustice and protect the values she held dear. Ending a chapter filled with hardship, Sarah was ready to step into a new one where she would continue to fight to make the world a better, fairer, and more just place. Thank you for sticking with this story until the end. If you found it interesting and meaningful, don't forget to hit the like button, share and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more exciting stories. Let's spread the message of justice and truth. See you in the next video.